that I invite all of us here. If you had not seen it, it's a rare privilege. If you had seen it, it's again a rare privilege to see it again. So I'm going to invite us to have, just to view the documentary, to see Mama and hear Mama, and where else but in Brentford. And thereafter we will have a discussion with amazing women, one of them Pascale, who did the documentary, and Waruna, about the voice, reverberating the voice of Mam Winnie. So over to the technicians. It's just so amazing that you put together that documentary. And I think there's so much that can be said about it. That's why I wanted to know if Thabang is here, because I think some of the answers to his questions were there, but we'll pick them up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about making that documentary?
Yeah, I will. Oh, this doesn't work. Okay, thank you. Thank you for singing at the end. That was my partner singing at the end of that film, who died very early on in the making of this film. And in fact, that's his daughter and his 3 grandsons who are looking for his grave. So this film always moves me personally on 2 counts. One, because his death at the early stages of the making of this film, and Mama's amazing, she wrote the most beautiful eulogy to him that we spoke at his funeral, and that the rage that was in me when I lost him in the way that I did as a consequence of the complete breakdown of any kind of health care, social care, etc. in this country, mixed with the rage that I felt traveling through the world and encountering the hostility to Mama Winnie, is what gave me the strength then to carry on making the film after he died, because initially I didn't think I could do it. Peter Makarube, some of you might know him or knew him, we made 3 films together, and he had always said to me that the film that needed to be made about the history of this country was a film about Mama Winnie, that it was the most complicated, difficult story to tell, that it was one that needed to be told from the outside also in, because so much of what made her life so difficult had been constructed by the media, the Western media, the limited access they had during the 80s, etc., and that to unpick politically that very complex, very difficult story was one that would need, well, firstly, my skills as a filmmaker, secondly, my capacity for Winnie to trust me and for Zinzi to trust me with that story, because it's a dangerous story. It's a very difficult story. It elicits huge passions everywhere. And that also, to make it, because I needed to use a lot of media footage, the whole film, much of the film is made essentially through 4 very long interviews that I had with Mama Winnie over 2 years, but also archive from media sources all over the world. Now that archive, I don't know whether you know, and this is where we come back to the economy that everyone was talking about this morning, that how much it costs to be able to use that footage. It's like 300,000 euros. I don't know what that is in rand, that's millions. It's such a lot of money to clear rights, including rights from SABC, who seemed to want to ensure this film would never come out. Because I made the film, the film was finished, it was shown, Mama Winnie saw it, there was a fantastic, I don't know whether any of you were at that premiere, but it was a standing ovation, of course, for her. Her family came. It was hundreds of people in the audience. But it was a film festival. It wasn't being shown generally. But even though the film was shown, we still hadn't cleared the rights because it's so expensive to show it on television or to show it in the cinemas. So the producers that I'd had to get on board to try and raise the money, and I ran around for 2 years all over Europe, you know, trying to persuade people and being blocked. I mean, just people in my face saying, this film mustn't be made. Do you know what you're going to unleash if you make a film like this? If you haven't already decided to condemn her before you make the film, you shouldn't be making this film, etc. Much opposition did I face. So it was a very difficult film to make and a huge responsibility. But of course, once Mama died, so sadly and so shockingly for all of us and her family, and you know, it wasn't the consequence of a long illness, it came out of like that. I heard first by an international news agency ringing my cell phone, and I had to run home, and I then did a series of interviews because I was the only one in the world who had a narrative that went counter to the demonization of Mam Winnie. So suddenly I was like lone voice speaking on Canadian television, British television, French television, all over on the day she died, because what was being rehashed constantly were all the documentaries that had been made that I'd seen and that had so outraged me before. And I knew, and Mama had said to me, you know, at one stage when we began speaking, she'd said, history will vindicate me. And I was thinking, well, it might, but there is so much out there. There is so much propaganda. There are so many other documentaries that have been made. There is so many lies, frankly, and very dangerous people, like that BBC documentary that you see at the end of this film. It was called The Missing Witness, and it takes a man called Katiza Kebukulu, who's just been put in jail in England for attacking someone with a meat cleaver. I mean, there's so much in this story, it's insane. So I was pleased that when Mama saw the film, she at the end came to me and said, this is the first time I recognize myself in a film. And even though many people, and I've shown this film in Harlem, I've shown it in Peckham, I've shown it all over the world, and obviously my white face is a shock. But you have to see the film to understand, to see what's inscribed in it, not just the history, but also the politics. And I'm aware that I don't think a black woman filmmaker from South Africa would have been able to have the sort of access that I managed eventually to. I'm not saying it's easy. I risked much. I mean, it was very dangerous also making this film. But this film, I hope, has kicked open something, that Kickstarter you were talking about, so that now the breach is open, and now many other plays, films, stories, books. There are history books being written, you know, about Mama now, and there's a counter narrative with proof. I.e., what you haven't seen, those of you who didn't see the film, is you see the director of Stratcom, you see the director of National Intelligence Services under Niels Barnard, under the apartheid state, all talking about how dangerous they clearly knew Winnie was, because Mama Winnie was, because of her huge power, political power, and how they, the psychological warfare and the programs of paying all kinds of people to be agents provocateurs around her, etc. You know, the film describes the whole story. I hope, and please, if you'd like to show it here, you now have the link. Anybody who's interested in seeing it, you will learn much from it. There we are. When I say learn, I mean from there,
There's so much to unpack. Layers and layers and layers. You know, in just what Pascale has said, and maybe before I give any of my own thoughts, just to come to you, Warona, as a creator, but not only a creator, a conscious creator, because we can all create. That's not the easy part. That's not the difficult part. The part is to be very conscious about what is it that you're doing. Talk to us, just your own experience, but also your own response as you see this.
Response to the film.
Yeah. And the delicacy of that kind of storytelling, you know, when there's one narrative that is very dominant and you want to be very, as a conscious creator.
Okay. I'll start with like an anecdote example thing. And then there's something that one of the daughters said the last time I saw the film. The first and last time I saw the film in Khayelitsha, and that I also want to address in terms of the voice. And so we, myself and a couple of people, a couple of strong black women, Sis Thembi Mtshali Jones, Kumasopatela, Indalo Stofile, we worked with Jehovah, this is so bad. Dr. Sindiwe Magona, she'd taken so there's a play written by, I mean, not a play, a book written by, please help me, I'm running out of like brain cells, about the Sisulus. Written by Eleanor, yes, written by Eleanor Sisulu about the Sisulus. And then what they had wanted to do was separate Me Albertina's story from Ntate's story, right? So then they did separate that, and the intention with that was to make it accessible to schools. So then Mesindiwe then took that and created some sort of an adaptation of the text into a play. And then we then took that and workshopped it and rewrote it in rehearsal and performance and all of that. Now we were quite clear about the fact that for us as theater makers, what we were observing was that there was a binary that was created between these two women, between Albertina Sisulu and Winnie Mandela. Albertina Sisulu was the saint, can never do wrong, can't be faulted. She actually was called the mother of the nation. Do you know she was the one who was called the mother of the nation? And this also played out in the TRC. But what we didn't know, what we found out was that actually there's a moment in detention when Winnie was pregnant, when Me Winnie was pregnant, where Me Albertina helped her save the fetus in her belly after interrogation. And when we were looking for stories of interrogation, the play was called O Ma Sisulu, so multiples of Me Sisulu, but the focus was Me Albertina Sisulu. And so when we're looking for information about what happened to Me Albertina in detention and all of that, everybody's very quiet. There's not much happened. But what we started seeing with pictures is that when she got married to Walter, she didn't have a scar, you know? And then somewhere along the way, she has this scar on her forehead. So then it became a motif of performance in the production. But we needed to answer the interrogation centers. We needed to answer what is happening there, what's going there. I'm fascinated with trauma. A lot of the plays that I work on there's trauma in them, and it's got to be embodied, it's got to be shared, it's got to be. I don't like to let the audience off the hook. Because we haven't been let off the hook. And we couldn't find anything from Mère Albertina, any archival material, anything, even from the family, about what really happened in the interrogation chambers for her. So to answer that space, we went to Winnie Mandela. So we went to 491. And we went through that, and her interrogations were the interrogations that we placed in the space, because it's all Masisulu, the multiples, right? And the multiple faces of Albertina Sisulu. So that the binary and the kind of like the separation that was happening can be actually we can try and find a way to kind of merge them into one complex being. And that Mère Albertina is not just, oh, I'm so happy to go see my husband, and Mère Winnie is like, fuck it! Do you know what I mean? So we didn't only just use her stories to tell, to kind of narrate the interrogation scenes, but we also used her voice. A recording of one, there's plenty of material on YouTube on her. So there's a recording where she talks about being in the interrogation chamber and being interrogated for 7 days and 7 nights. And that the body gets to a point where it gets so numb that you actually faint. And at that point, your body belongs to them. And at some point, she got so hurt, violated, that she was urinating blood. But then at the end of it, she says something towards the lines of, she supposes that South Africa, like any other democracy, has the inclination, or it has the inclination to kill its own people. Something along those lines. I don't remember the direct thing. And that's really what we were aiming to do with that, and to say that with women, that as women we have, so the 3 performers were 3 aspects of Mère Albertina, from the young girl who, to the high school student, to the nurse, and then to the freedom fighter. And it's quite interesting that their journeys are the same. They're rural girls who were just taken by politics, like you said, and thrown into the political sphere, and they had to deal with it. But they came from an internal space, their spirit, their souls, were those spaces that say that were about community and about communitas. And it was about, actually, we need to be healing, and we need to be working with our people and all of that. If I'm making sense. In the film, when I saw it, one of her daughters says something along the lines, again, I'm paraphrasing, Mama has always had the ability to cry inside or something, and still be, so what you see on the outside is not really what's happening inside. And I mean, I admire something about the rage of that generation. Like, they're angry, but somehow there's a soft-spokenness. And actually, I'm just going to let you know that this is what happened, But you can see in their eyes the fury, and I wonder about how that could be used to our benefit, because we are angry, right? So I wonder how, in multiplying the voices from your perspectives, how we can use that for for our benefit, yeah. To build.
Yeah. I'm going to open it up for people to ask questions, but I want to pick up on a theme, ya potso e abuti, ke re ke mang? Thabang. A ibutsitseng, because what was very clear for me in this documentary is where the different men in that piece we just saw located themselves. Umametse Thabang? Ne? And when I say Thabang, I'm talking about all of you guys, ne? We are now having a conversation, Lelona, if you allow me. Ntho e ke lekang ho e tjho ke hore and I don't know if you saw it. It's where the men in the documentary located themselves at different times in the struggle. And then I think the conversation I then want us to have is, what does that mean for us? And ha ke re us ke bua ka lona as the men of now, not the men in the documentary. And I found it very astounding for me that all the men, just in the piece we saw, Mandela, himself, Dudu, himself, Sidney Mufumadi, himself, ne? Let's talk about men that history has told us they are admirable men. Umametse Thabang? Admirable, ke Mandela, admirable. Every street in every town, in every, I'm sure like Japan, there's a street called Mandela Boulevard. Ne? That's how we admire him. I get, there's no debate that he's an admirable man. I get, Dudu wears, he's admirable and he wears a dress. Too admirable. Ne? Double admirable. And how even the admirable men, at a particular time in history, chose certain positions. Ne? So there's a voiceover, I don't know if it's your voice, no, it's somebody's, there's a voice when they were getting into inauguration.
It's the biographer, it's
Anne-Marie,
Yeah.
the voice, is saying he had forgiven so many people, but he couldn't forgive her. Ne? And Mama Winnie says, when she talks and then you see what was happening in the TRC, about how the apartheid people can be let go of, but she's the only one that was tried from the liberation movement. Ke leka ho kopa Thabang hore, unless we look at that and just realize how even the admirable men position themselves in certain instances, unless we really problematize it, we look at it, especially lona bontate ba ka hara ntlo ena, unless you do that, you will always make the anger of women about you. Do you understand what I'm saying? You will always make the anger that women face. Hence that question came, because we were spending so much time speaking about the anger of women. But in fact, what we need to interrogate symbolically is how men position themselves. I don't know if you saw that conference, the ANC conference, it's in the film. Is it in the film? I've seen it before. Is it in the documentary?
I had to cut it down. In the longer version, yeah. If you saw the
Yeah, in the longer version, there is a place where Winnie is nominated from the floor, ne? To be the deputy president. Go and see the film and look at Mandela's face.
And Thabo Mbeki's next to him. Yeah.
And then they get Albertina to nominate Nelson Mandela.
Thabo Mbeki.
No, Nelson Mandela.
For deputy president?
No, for president.
For president, you are right.
Later.
Is it later?
It's later. It's now. What's at issue here is who is going to be the deputy
The
president.
deputy, yes.
And because Mam Winnie was not was not permitted. I mean, I've discovered many things also since the making of this film, and one could literally call it the Winnie clause. At the national conference, two things happened. Just before the national conference, this happened at the TRC, where Mam Winnie was effectively sort of criminalized in not in any sort of way in which she could defend herself, etc. Then you go to the national conference, and everyone's been doing their homework, those who want to ensure that she doesn't come up on the ticket to potentially be nominated as deputy president. Of course, she's running against Zuma. So that's not really the point. The point is they change the rules, and I've been told that you could almost call it a Winnie clause. Suddenly, from 10% of the National Convention needing to back a nomination, they raise it to 30%. And having done all that hard work to make sure that there's poor Mam Winnie defending herself at the TRC, suddenly responsible for the whole of apartheid, the one who's sacrificed in order supposedly to purify all the violence of the movement, of the struggle for liberation in this country. There she is, sacrificed, the woman. And that, of course, ensures that when they change the ruling, she's off the ticket. And they needed her off the ticket because they knew her power was so great. And of course, foreign media always say her power in the townships. I mean, what are we talking about? We're talking about her power in relation to South Africans. So she was effectively politically neutralized because she was criminalized. And there are many ways in which that mechanism was put into place. And what I was struck by in the making of the film was two things. One, that someone like Niels Barnard, who was the head of BOSS, the head of the underground, the intelligence agencies, a very powerful man, and he was the man who was negotiating and sort of managing the release of Nelson and having these 48 meetings with him, trying to groom him, trying to make him into that sort of saintly figure that they were hoping would come out, as Mama says in the film, preaching so much peace to protect them, as she says. But what I was struck by was that Niels Barnard and Nelson Mandela were on the same wavelength in that they were both patriarchal South African men. So they joined each other in the idea that a woman's place was at home as a good mother, a good wife in the kitchen. And it certainly wasn't as a heretic, undisciplined woman out there with a loud mouth, with a political constituency, power of her own, who could stand up and say, no, these negotiations are not going the way that will protect our people. These negotiations are not giving enough of a voice to people like me, like Chris Hani, who was murdered. She effectively represented the radical left wing, if you like, that was pushed out of the scene so that a sort of a middle ground could somehow be reached. And I think I've spoken too much, but if I can say one more thing, It's a metaphor that haunted me throughout the making of this film. And it's a metaphor that comes from history, American and European history, which is that in the 16th and 17th centuries, just as capitalism was beginning to take hold, three things happened, to simplify. One, colonialism, that built one of the great pillars of capitalism. The second was the destitution of the land. You know, people were forced off the land so that they would become labor in the factories and be able to do that. And the third thing was that hundreds of thousands of women were burnt as witches. And so there are many feminists who will argue that witch burning is a critical pillar in the construction of capitalism. And if we're talking about the moment at which South Africa was transitioning, supposedly, a very violent period of time, that in 1994, yes, the first democratic elections were going to take place, but the most important thing that people were worried about was, A, the people who owned everything, the means of production, i.e. international capital, needed business to continue as usual. And they needed to negotiate with men like Thabo Mbeki, etc., who went to my university in England, in Sussex, and was formed in economics, etc., and who would speak that language so that the economy would keep running as it did and would do in the future. And Mam Winnie and Chris Hani were arguing for something utterly radical, socialist, for a complete transformation of this country, which never occurred. And so that witch burning, to me, that metaphor, Mama Winnie was put on that pyre. She became the symbolic burning woman, and the TRC was the auto da fe, as we call it, you know, historic, that was where they set the match to, like, this huge pyre.
Wow.